to talk 10-pin. We've got a special guest today, Mr. Roger Creamer from QubicaAMF. Welcome, Roger.
Yeah, hi, John. Nice to be with you again.
And I believe we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but we're going to start with string bowling and the influx of string machines from the QubicaAMF company. You told me earlier there's going to be, by the end of 2019, probably about 20%
I think in
string
the UK,
machines.
Yeah, I think in the UK, you know, knowing what is planned by some of the bigger operators with changing from 3/4 to strings, my estimation is probably around 20% of the machines installed by the end of next year will be strings. If you go back to 2010, I don't think 1% were string machines.
And there's been quite a lot of talk from the bowlers not overly keen on string machines coming in due to various differences, their perceived differences.
I think everyone is resistant to change. People are comfortable with what they're used to, and anything that comes along that's new sometimes takes some time to embrace. With string machines, from the research that has been done, I think the effect on pinfall, or an average, would be more effective of the top bowlers as opposed to the average bowlers. You know, the weight distribution of a string compared with the weight of the pin on full-size bowling is so big that the strings doesn't have a lot of effect. However, I think you'd have to concede, because the strings are there, it may stop the messenger pin that the top bowlers are able to get. And obviously the bowlers that are averaging 160 and 170, they don't bowl the ball effectively enough to be able to get messenger pins anyway. So I think the real effect on an average would be on the top bowler. But you're probably talking of, in a season, 1 or 2 pins.
The 7 will hit the 10 though on a string, won't it?
It will indeed, yeah, it will indeed. You know, I'm just giving those people that are against strings the benefit of the doubt and saying, okay, sometimes there could be an effect.
Yeah.
You know, I've done some research recently because I wrote a paper for World Bowling that I submitted to them a few months ago. Tom Clark from the PBA helped me out by supplying me the average of the top pro in each year from 1918 to the current day. And what I wanted to do is really look to see how technology had changed the top pro's average as we'd gone, you know, through time. And around 1980, 81, the top pro would have been averaging about 213.
With urethane, obviously, at the time. Plastic, plastic at the time.
1980, we only had you know, polyester, plastic,
yeah,
or hard rubber. The angle came along in about 1984,
right.
First urethane, and it had an effect on scoring. Absolutely no data about it. Scoring went up, and it was pretty consistent until you got to about 1994-5, when the first reactive urethanes came in, and then scoring went up again. Now, the PBA have been, you know, obviously seeing this. I assume one of the reasons that they introduced the animal patterns in the early 2000s was to try and control scoring, because it was just getting crazy. And I believe I'm right in saying that up until now, only 2 people have ever won on every pattern. Mika Korven-Iman was one of them. But despite that, average pros now are averaging around 228. So technology has had a huge impact on scoring over the last few decades. Personally speaking, I don't really see what the real issue is with embracing a piece of equipment that will have an effect of maybe 1 or 2 pins. I think the sport has got to change. I really do believe that. And having had 50 years in an industry that I love, I'll go back to the beginning of that and say that I was introduced to the industry through the sport. I was a bowler and I loved it. I spent hours in the bowling centre watching, because I couldn't always afford to play, to see the effect that a ball would have on hitting the pins, why it fell this way, why this bowler got one thing, another bowler got something else. I've always been fascinated with the game, and I think the game is as great today as it ever was. However, I spent quite a number of years away from the sport. I've found that as my career in the bowling industry moved on, there were times when I just couldn't find the time to go bowling, or certainly not the time to commit myself to a league week after week after week. So I really spent quite a time away, not looking too closely at the sport, other than to see that it was in decline, worldwide pretty much. It was only about 4 years ago when the CEO of our company, when we had an issue, I think it was in the Middle East, a sports issue with one of the federations. He said to me, look, Roger, you know more about this than I do. This is something you should address. And pretty much from that point on, the company have asked me to spend some of my time on trying to get involved in sport. Now, we don't have a commercial interest in this because QubicaAMF do not make bowling balls for the hot shots. We don't make the retail shoes or bags or whatever. We're doing this because we believe in the sport. So they're investing in me, the amount of money it costs me to fly around the world to attend major championships and what have you. But when I submitted that paper a couple of months ago, and it's the second time I've submitted something to the World Bowling about strings, which I have to disappointedly say I haven't had the courtesy to reply from either of them. But nevertheless, when we went to a meeting in Detroit a couple of months ago, the only thing I was told in advance was World Bowling want to talk to the interested parties, manufacturers, players associations, etc., about specifications. And it was a bit of a surprise to me when I got there that the only specification we actually talked about was bowling balls, because USBC had suddenly come up with a new rule and said from this point on there will be no balance holes in a ball. And my guess is that some of the federations from World Bowling had turned around to World Bowling and said, we don't like this. So that was the thing that really got me involved in this and why I submitted this paper about strings at that particular time. As I said, it wasn't discussed at that meeting. I've subsequently written to World Bowling and said, you asked for these papers, I've given it to you. Is it something that's being discussed by your technical committee? And if there is a result, as I put the paper in, will you tell me what that result is? But as I said, I haven't had a reply to that. But at that meeting, Kevin Dornberger sat in the chair, and most of the major manufacturers were represented. USBC was there, PBA was represented, and there was 3 of the members of the technical team from World Bowling. And Kevin Dornberger started the meeting by saying, what we'll do is go around the room and give each of you 5 minutes to discuss this or to put your point of views. And unfortunately, because of my stupidity and where I chose to sit, I was first and not prepared. But I just said what I really felt, and that was that World Bowling's major issue should not at this time in history be its specifications, but how to address what's going wrong with the sport. Now, World Bowling and PBA have come up with a new scoring system which is being popularly called current frame.
Yeah, everybody's called it World Bowling, but actually called current frame.
Yeah. When I first made inquiries about PBA and World Bowling, they didn't really know what to call it, and it was a bit of a backwards and forwards to actually discover who did what. And I saw something, and I forget where it came from now, that said current frame, and I went back to them and said, is it current frame? And they said, well, it wasn't the first choice, but it's the one that seems to be being adopted. We've in fact have introduced it into our scoring system and will be available from next year on.
So it's now coming to the BESEX scoring system?
It will, yes. I think Conqueror 13, which is due for release next January or February, includes the current frame scoring system.
That's Conqueror as well then?
Now let me just spend 2 minutes to explain current frame scoring. If you get a strike, it's worth 30.
Yeah.
If you get a spare, it's worth 10 plus whatever the pinfall was with the first ball. 9 spares, 19. 9 misses, still a 9. And 7-2 is still 9. So there we are. In 30 seconds, I've explained to you current frame scoring. How long would it take me to explain to you how to score the way we score now if you were a non-bowler?
Kind of the same, 10 plus your next 2 balls or 10 plus your next 1. And then you spare.
Come on, come on.
Yeah, you're right. It takes longer.
It does.
Yeah.
It takes a long time. And someone said, well, why should we change? And I said, look, let's just stop and think. Is everything that we do in life always right the first time? I said, no, you're probably right, it's not. So I said, well, let's imagine there's 2 guys in the first bowling alley around 1882 where they put an extra pin in. And these guys are sitting around thinking, well, we need to know how to score this. Now, say they'd said, what we'll do is we'll have 30 for a strike and 9 spare will be 19. And then they ran that scoring system until the current day. And then someone said, I tell you what, let's have another scoring system. Yeah. We'll have a strike and you need to wait until you've taken 2 more shots before you can add it up. They'd say, you've got to be crazy.
Yeah.
So, I think one of the things that sport bowling hasn't addressed as well as other sports, and we can name some of the other sports where they've had to do major rule changes or the way that they play their game and to stay current and to survive in the world that we live in today, which is considerably different to what it was 30 years ago, let alone
60, 70. Yeah.
So things have changed an awful lot, and I don't think bowling in general, sport bowling in general, and I'm not blaming World Bowling or FIQ before it or its member federations. One of their problems is they're under-resourced, not only in cash, but in human resources, because with the deepest respect, and I say deepest respect when I use the word amateur, too many of our federations around the world have no choice but to be run and managed by amateurs. These guys and girls have jobs somewhere else and they give up their spare time and do their best for bowling.
They're the only ones that care sometimes.
Exactly, they're the only ones that care. So, having spent that period away from sport bowling and then coming back and looking at it anew, I got to thinking we're doing this wrong. And I'll give you a couple of examples. And they'll both be around the World Cup, and then no one outside of QubicaAMF can have a go at me afterwards. A couple of years ago, we sponsored the Dutch qualifying for the World Cup because the town that it was held in, Scheveningen, and I hope that's the correct pronunciation, had a very large Chinese community, and because the final was in Shanghai, they decked the centre up to look like Chinatown. It was really very, very nice. It was a 2-day event. It was extremely well run, but the most exciting part of the competition had nothing to do with the World Cup qualifying. It was when the leaders in the tournament challenged each other on some of the best X games, the 5-frame games.
Yeah.
And then you had the crowd, because halfway through the day there was quite a crowd there. You had the crowd active and shouting and screaming. It was really fun. But I watched there with one of my colleagues from QubicaAMF at 11 o'clock that same evening to watch the final and the person that would go to the World Cup. And I think the person that won the thing in the afternoon actually went to Mexico or something. But anyway, this person at 11 o'clock at night, whoever won that game was going to represent their country at the Bowling World Cup. The place was empty.
Yeah.
It was empty. And the final was boring and it was long. And I looked at this and I thought, and I'd been away a long time, and the last time I was in that sort of environment, I was with sport all the time, and I'm like, what I think too many people in bowling are like, it's always been like this, why change it? Yeah. Or it is this way, and I'm not thinking of changing it. So then we get to Shanghai, and you were in Shanghai, so you'll know what I'm telling you is the truth. The World Cup was in a really nice arena that was located just above the bowling centre. there were 2,000 people in the tiered seating watching that event when it started.
Yeah.
Almost 4 hours later, when the finals for the men, the last game between the two men, one of them was
with a Chinese ball.
the winner was a Chinese, and in the audience was 200 people.
Yeah.
Now we couldn't even retain an audience when their own is going to win it. And I thought, we've got to think about this again. And you know, the reason I am keen to spend this hour or so with you is to try and start the debate, because we can't carry on overseeing the decline in the sport that we all love.
Do you think one of the issues is the scoring then? You do think it should be shorter, changed? The world scoring, the current scoring, it's a new one, but it's not maybe the answer at the moment. Do we need another one?
It still makes the game quite long.
5 frames?
I think you need to look at a lot of things. We talked earlier, one sport that had to make major changes, badminton, I'm pretty sure it's badminton, where you had to have the serve before you could score.
Yeah.
So you won a point, which gave you the right to serve for a point, but the other guy won. And it goes backwards and forwards, and you're there 10 minutes going backwards and forwards, no one scored.
Not making any points, yeah.
What happened? Badminton changed. You don't have to win the right to serve to score. If you win a point, you get a point.
And I think that's what World Bowling and Kevin Dornberger were looking at with the initial scoring for the world scoring or current frame. They were looking at that 1-0, 2-1, 3-1, 3-2 mentality up to maybe about 7 points, and then playing it over 3 or 5 legs, as opposed to your 12 frames. Maybe 7 balls and 7 balls and 7 balls is 21 balls and not 36.
Well, the other thing that strikes me, and the technology is available and is in use for us to actually stop a game at the point when the other person can't win.
Yeah.
Why? If I'm on the 14th playing golf, match play, and I can't win, I don't insult my partner by saying, but we have to pay 15, 16, 17, 18. We go back to the clubhouse and have a drink.
Yeah.
I paid because I lost.
Yeah.
But in bowling, we have a boring game, 7th frame, it's all over. We insist that they finish the game, and the audience, which is already asleep, we insist they sit there. And we can't go on like that. We can't go on like that. When we put when we get bowling onto television, and the PBA have done a great deal with Fox for the coming couple of seasons, when we get it there, it's got to be understood by more people than bowlers. Because if the only people we can get to watch 10-pin bowling on television are bowlers, we are failing. We are failing. Because that audience is dying. You know, we're all getting older. We've got to attract new people. And under its current format, with the way we lead our lives today, it is not attractive to those people who don't currently bowl.
People want things quicker, generally.
Sure. You know, if you take the typical stepladder or the knockout final, how many do we have in China? 3 girls, 3 boys, 3 men, 3 women. It took 4 hours. 4 hours for the number 3 to play the number 2 and the number 2 to play the number 1. 4 hours.
And that's considered the most exciting way of doing it, to have a step ladder.
Come on. You know, who are we kidding? So, you know, strings is one issue, and it needs to be addressed. You know, even if they say go away, we'll never accept it. It still needs to be addressed. World Bowling needs to be the authority that says whether they feel it should be accepted or not. Now, they adopt USB-C rules. They have done from the beginning of time. And World Bowling doesn't really have the resources to be able to invest into a test centre to do that job themselves. So you're still going to have USB-C. But it is World Bowling that governs the sport worldwide, is the body recognised by the Olympic movement, you know, by governments around the world as the official body that governs the sport of bowling. Yeah. It's their responsibility to say we need to address the issue of strings.
Am I
Some
right?
federations have done it on their own. You know,
Yeah.
the British Champion Bowling
The
Association.
Canadians, the Australians.
Yeah. The British Champion Bowling Association, when they made their announcement recently, said we will recognise a 300 game on strings equally with freefall machines. And the Australian Federation, which I had quite a number of emails exchanged with them through Cara Honeychurch, who was really one of their best players in the past. They originally categorised strings, a 300 game on strings, as a 300 game on strings, and over here it's freefall. But they reversed that decision, I think, back in July, and now they recognise them equally.
See, I'm not sure about that one. I think they are two different codes, and I think that's the problem a lot of people have with string machines, that it is significantly different. Maybe not massively overall, but it is different enough that you can't have
different.
We can't have the same rules in one and exactly put them in the other one, because some of them won't work. The off-spot pin, for instance.
True.
So for that reason alone, you've probably got two slightly different codes.
But you know, some machines will not pick up an out of range pin.
Well, as long as the federation,
So what happens is placed back where it came
as long as the
from originally.
federation cover both sides of that sport as one, even though they've got slightly different rules for each one, under the same banner, is much better than leaving that sport for somebody else to walk in and, I don't know. Barry Hearn, for instance, goes, I like the look of these string machines. I know I'm going to do a snooker or a darts and do the same thing. Throw a load of money in it, poach a few players. You're all playing on string now. All the players are like, okay, you know, I'm getting paid for this, so I'll do it.
I think that, the people that would be most resistant to change are the people that are playing. But I think they have to ask themselves what responsibility they have for the sport, not just themselves, but the sport in general, especially the top guys that, you know, are able to live off of bowling. They should really be asking themselves, what responsibility do I have to the sport? And I think in doing that, they have to appreciate the fact that their need, or when change is required, they have to embrace it. Because, you know, we live in different times from the time when bowling was, you know, competitive bowling was big. You know, our lifestyles are different, our commitments in life are different. We've got to think about it again if we're going to ask people to commit themselves to bowling. And, you know, let's just look at the UK. If there are 20% of the machines by the end of next year installed in the UK are on strings,
And that's going to be a fact.
oh, that'll be a fact. That will not change. What's happening. What's happening this year, what happened last year, and we know will continue to happen next year. That's going to be a fact. By not embracing that technology, 20% of the people that go bowling in the UK, you've lost.
20% lost.
That's 20% are lost.
It's 20% that may well move to traditional bowling. They start on string and move to another one, or vice versa. Not so much vice versa, but
You know, I do accept the issue that there is a marginal difference in scoring. I accept the off spot rule.
but the cosmetic rules that can be changed, you can pretty much copy the whole rule book and then change the ones that need changing.
They're rules, and rules are there. You know, governments change them all the time, and you can see dozens of sports that have done it. Change the format, change the rules.
Are we just at the stage where people seem to think that World Bowling are waiting for the USBC to make a decision? Because World Bowling maybe don't have enough funding to go through the amount of research that they're going to need to do to sanction string machines. Are they waiting for the USBC to do it?
Well, I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of World Bowling. The machine, the pins, they're going to put the pins down in the same spot as a freefall machine. I think it's really a declaration by World Bowling to say that we would accept. I don't think there is the same requirement to go through the testing that had to be gone through in earlier years.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's just the issues that people have identified
It
with
is
checking.
Do we accept it or do we not?
Yeah.
And I think it's as simple as that. I'm employed by a manufacturer, and I think I'm extremely lucky in as much as I think I'm employed by the best one. And we have ownership that is prepared to reinvest the money year after year in trying to figure out what we can do to make it easier for a proprietor to get in the 80% of the population that do not go and do not like bowling. I think if we're helping the proprietor out and the proprietor can get people in, then I think it's between sport bowling and the proprietors how they can convert them into the sport bowlers. My entrance into this argument is only one that I want to see things get better. And I'm not saying, listen to me, I have the answers, because I don't. What I'm saying is, listen to me, let's have a debate.
Yeah, let's at least talk about it.
Think about this. We need to talk
coming.
about it.
It's here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Darts is a good example. Is darts any more skillful than bowling? I shouldn't think so. One of the benefits of darts is you can get really close to the action. But I know Barry Hearn, who started the Weber Cup, because I was involved with Barry on its forerunners.
AMF Masters.
Yeah, and he always said, I like bowling because I can get close to everything. I can get facial expressions on people much better than if they were on a football field. So he could see the benefits of it. But in its current format, if you're lucky enough to get a Barry Hearn with Matchroom Sports behind him to get it televised, then you've got to do something that's more attractive than what we're doing. I really believe that. I was talking a few minutes ago about the situation when I'm on the golf course on the 14th, and I've lost. Probably should have told the truth. I would have actually lost at the 9th. But Barry Hearn has been using Matchroom Sport, been using the current frame scoring system for the last 3 years now.
About 3 years.
Last 3 years.
Yeah.
They did it specifically because they wanted the audience
to understand it better.
They were trying to attract, to understand it better. It's not their television station this is going out on. They're selling this to Sky. And Sky are going to look at the number of people that are watching. So Barry Hearn and the people behind the Matchroom Sports organisation said, let's make this as simple as possible so that we can attract a wider audience. It's as simple as that. One of the things they also does, and I only noticed that actually when I attended last year's event.
The year before, I think it was.
It might have been the year before.
Yeah, Manchester.
In Manchester. That they actually show what the maximum score that they can score at any one time throughout the game.
Yeah.
So that you can see that if there was a point in the game, maybe 6 or 7 frame, when the winner has already been decided, they could stop. There was no need to go on. Because there is no point to it. Because throwing the ball down on the lane on its own is not entertaining.
The problem with that, I think, is the live TV aspect of it. If it were pre-recorded, you can kind of drop things when you want, and then you can fill a show.
Sure. With a live television program, you're relying on 10 frames.
That Manchester event, we finished really early. We didn't get to the year before. I think 2015, we didn't actually get more than a couple of games on the Sunday.
Yeah, but that's because it had already been determined that Europe won.
Yeah.
But if you look at if you looked at the games, and I challenge you to do it, if you looked at the games between the best players from Europe and the best players from the US, they never decide in the 6th frame. It might get decided in the 8th or 9th. So it's not a long time.
Do you think the world scoring's worked with the Weber Cup? For you? Do you think it's worked?
I've watched the Weber Cup for the last 3 years, and in fact the last one I had to watch it on TV because I couldn't be there. I think it works very well. It's just easy to understand.
And to the point now, actually, where you've been instrumental in actually getting that put in the scoring systems.
I tried for a couple of years, I have to confess.
They weren't overly impressed at first to have it in.
I don't know that they were overly impressed. I think the guys that are given the responsibility of writing software and that sort of thing.
Oh man, another job.
They weren't that keen. The president of the company at that time said, no, please don't dismiss it. But it went backwards and forwards, and nothing was really done until the Vivian Fung a couple of months ago.
At the Asian Championships.
About 9 months ago now, from Hong Kong. Vivian said, we are holding the Asian Games in Palembang. We will be using that scoring system. And it would be great if it was incorporated in your scoring system. So we wrote it at that particular time. It will be part of the next release of Conqueror. Conqueror is the front desk system, the management system behind our scoring systems. So when that is released, January or February next year, the current frame option is in there. There's no extra charge for it. It's just if you upgrade to Conqueror 13, then it's there.
Yeah. So basically,
we used it at Palembang. It was beautiful. It was absolutely perfect.
Basically, around the world, bowlers are going to get.
In fact, you can see it. If you go to the office in Hemel Hempstead, Darren has it on the computer.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. So it looks nice. It went without a hitch. You know, Barry Hearn unfortunately has had to use his own little software program to do it because
there was nothing at the time.
Until we put it into Conqueror, it's never been available.
As QubicaAMF for the company now, you've embraced the world scoring with the traditional scoring. You've also got your 5-frame and your game type scoring. Is it just a case of your company could come up with a few more ideas, put them on the scoring system, and let bowlers decide which one they like?
You know, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. In as much, no, it's not necessarily more complicated. It's more expensive.
Yeah, actually,
when you've got a system, when you've got a system that you have to write additional software for to see if it works, I don't think typically we do that sort of thing.
We live in a world of updates now, though, where you can do these things, and you can give it away as a free update or a paid update.
We have over 50 people in our R&D. It's a lot of people. A lot of those guys are writing software, and they are already fully occupied just by doing what we're doing.
Yeah, quite busy on hyperbowling.
It probably took, from the time that we first said that we would do current frame scoring, it probably took 6 months before it was ready. You know, testing it, and plus the fact it can be integrated with what you've already got.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the answer is, you know, if all of a sudden a whole bunch of tournaments had a final that was much quicker by using a 5-frame format, that would be relatively easy for us to do, in as much that we already have 5-frame formats in our systems.
But changing 5 to 7, it probably wouldn't be a massive amount of work to change it to 7, possibly, if that was the number that was agreed. 5 seems too short to me. To take it from 12 to 5, because 5 strikes and it's all over.
How long's a game of darts take?
I know, but I mean, you're looking at these bowlers can shoot strikes for fun, so you're going to see a lot of matches where it's just strike against strike 9, that's probably quite exciting.
Sure.
At least 7, at least maybe 5's too little and 7's about right though, because it's that little bit longer. Everybody can shoot 5 in a row. Shooting 7 takes a little bit more skill than 5.
It's as I said a little while ago, I don't have the answers.
But have the debate.
Let's have the debate.
Yeah.
And what is it? Is it 5, 6, 7, whatever?
And we're bringing the people at home now. You've been watching for a while, so send in some of your questions through the Facebook chat. We're just looking at the moment. We've got Rob Kendall, Dave Angus, Melissa Valens and Andy James all commented so far. But if you've got any questions for Roger in the next 20 minutes, half an hour, make sure you send them in, and we'll ask Roger. Just show you a picture of the string machine that we're talking about at the moment. Have you bowled on them at all, Roger? You've been a bowler all your life. Have you actually bowled on them?
I haven't picked up a bowling ball, other than to move one around the office. Since 2004.
Wow.
2004. And that was in the Polish National Championships. I came second.
And how old were you then? Was 60?
I was a lot younger than I was now.
But still got it though, to a degree, when you were playing.
Do you know, I look at bowling, I think there are two games of bowling. There's the one that I was fortunate enough to play, which was extremely competitive at the top. It is a totally different game to the one that I would be forced to play if I picked up a bowling ball today. That just does not appeal to me.
You don't need one ball now, you need 8.
If I can compete, if I can go out with the best and still hold my own, I would probably still play. But the reality is I can't. I can't devote, my travel schedule would just not allow me to devote time to practicing and things like that. I have a love for the sport, and I don't think anyone can doubt that. And it's not diminished just because I don't play anymore.
One of the problems QubicaAMF seem to have at the moment then, Roger, is you're bringing out this string technology, which is saving customers a lot of money.
Unfortunately.
But you're also doing yourself out of after sales.
Yeah.
And
unfortunately, like you say you introduced that little segment as if we were the only ones that were doing it.
The competitive
string market
same,
is much more than freefall. Freefall, there's really one major competitor. There's another which we don't really count, and they're going to be able to hear me say that. But we have one competitor on freefall machines. On string machines, there has got to be 10.
Yeah, there's quite a few variations.
So one is much more competitive. And the other thing is, and I think this is where you were leading into, the aftermarket business, if you were just looking at strings, and when I'm talking about aftermarket, we're talking about spare parts and things like that, is almost non-existent on strings.
Yeah, there's only so much real
string machines are getting some people into the business because they can afford them, because they're cheaper. And the other thing that has changed, with a freeform machine, you need a very good technician. They're just not around. One, the industry doesn't pay enough for a good engineer. Secondly, a good engineer doesn't want to work Saturdays and Sunday nights. I've got a bowling centre, but I don't have anyone that will operate the machine, so they keep falling apart and they break down, and my customers don't want to come here. What do you do? We have gone through change. And all I'm saying is now it's time for sport bowling to catch up with the change.
Well, as a company, you introduced the world to bowling with the other competitors.
We did indeed.
You gave people the sport in the first place. Now you're changing it slightly.
We didn't give...
You're giving the customers what they want, and the customers are now going to tell us what they want, which is that product and not the other one. So we're going to be left with maybe 20 centres in the future. And
I think you're going to have more. The bowling business in the UK, for example, is still growing. Other than the period recently when I worked in the UK, my first involvement with the product side of the bowling business was back in the 1980s, and we went from having a little over 50 centres, I think, in 1985 to 200 by 1990. It was a huge growth.
That came from after the 85 refits by Brian North and stuff like that.
Exactly. AMF really fueled the growth because they did a modernisation. Because of those 50, AMF owned a third of them.
Yeah.
I think we had 17 or 18 centres, and we had a modernisation program. We updated pin spotters. Automatic scoring was new at that time, so that came along. We moved the bars around. We made more sophisticated fast food restaurants. Made a lot of difference. And then it brought people back into bowling centres, and the big chain operators, seeing this, started investing money. 1 year we installed 1,300 lanes in the UK. 88 or 89, 1,300.
Right, we've got a couple of questions now. When will the QubicaAMF World Cup Showpiece tournament be held on strings? From Rob.
That's a good question.
Do you think it ever would be?
I don't see why not. I think one of the things about an event, and we're talking about the World Cup. World Cup is held in the bowling centre. Providing lane 1 to lane 32, if it's a 32 lane house, are all string machines, then why not? I don't see any reason why it couldn't. For sure, if you're going to have a competition where half of the people are playing on strings and half of the people playing on freefall, that's unfair competition. I would agree with that. But if everyone is playing on the same condition, I don't really see the problem.
And a question from Andy James. If freefall machines are more expensive to manufacture, install and maintain, is it likely they will stop being manufactured in the near future, freefall? Will you stop making them in the future?
I would be surprised if we ever got to the stage where freefall machines weren't being manufactured. I'd be staggered. I'd be staggered if that ever happened, because you'll still see those people. Some parts of the world, sport bowling is still very, very strong. And I spent a bit of time in Southeast Asia because it's one of the territories where I work with distributors. Sport bowling is very strong there. And the federations are very influential on the buyer. In fact, sometimes the federation invests money into bowling centres themselves. Palembang, where we had the Asian Games a couple of weeks ago, 40 lane centres sponsored and funded by the government. You're going to have those traditionalists that would never, ever, ever change. And you know, the free-fall machine is developed. It really is a case of having the right number of components coming in to assemble for the number of machines that you need to sell. So I don't really see ever a time when free-fall machines would disappear.
Do you think the lack of concern in America at the moment is based on the fact that they've got that many centres in the country that
you know the impact
we won't really see a day when they're all string in America?
No, you won't, because you know the reality of it is bowling, the bowling market, number of lanes installed is bigger in the United States than anywhere else. So the impact on strings is never ever going to be what it is here. And have a look at the setup of bowling in the UK, or the bowling centres. Almost half of the centres are in the hands of chains, and over half the lanes are in the hands of chains. So if one of those chains decided to change something, it has a big impact because they control so many centres. In the US, the number of centres in the hands of chains now is very much diminished. I think the only one that's left now
probably the biggest
is Bowmore, who have renamed themselves recently to Bolero, I think.
All right.
They probably have, I don't know, they had all the AMF centres, they took over the Brunswick centres a few years ago, so they probably have 250, 300. But even if they decided to change every free-fall machine to string, the impact on the installed base, the percentage impact, would be tiny.
Right.
Because the majority of bowling centres in the US are still owned by
and leading
the guy that's behind the
leading
front
into a
desk.
question here then with Rob Kendall again. How many sanctionable versions of string pin setters are there out there at the moment?
Sanctionable?
Basically your machines, if we don't count the opposition and all, how many have you installed in the last couple of years around the world? You say 20% in the UK, but what's that figure globally?
Okay, let me just address the UK first. I'm just trying to give a rough number for the UK. 20. There's been, I would think, close to 500 installed in the UK in the last couple of years.
500 lanes of string.
And the total number of lanes installed in the UK at the moment is a little over 6,000.
Right, so it's a growing amount, but it's not a massive amount at the moment.
But if you go back to 2010, there wasn't 1% of the installed base was strings.
Yeah.
So the impact it's quite sudden, but it's quite significant.
How much of this new string has come from the VIP sector more than have they led the way on this?
No.
The fact that they've been getting it has been showing the change.
I can't think of a centre where we have free fall and string installed in the same place.
What I mean is lane 7, for instance, and all-style lanes, and any of those that have come in with particularly string machines, have they shown the chain centres that there's a different way? Have they helped you guys sell more by having them? Because the chains are coming in quite late. Tempin are doing them now. Hollywood have got a few.
Yeah.
But, you know, they're still looking at it as opposed to made that jump yet. But VIP section.
I'm sure.
bought
If
straight
I was
into
about, what I don't like to do is speak for someone else.
Yeah.
Unless they've said specifically, Roger, this is, and I don't have that information. I would be surprised if both Tenpin and Hollywood didn't look to see what Lane 7 were doing, and the fact that they were successful in doing it.
Yeah.
You see, I think the string movement was started here. Typically, Lane 7 is an example of it. And there were a couple of local authorities where there was a local trust that ran bowling centres.
Yeah, Cramlington's got them, and I think Selby and a few others.
There are a few around. Those first centres that really had they weren't sport minded. This was just open for fun. And I think the fact that it hasn't seemed to change the game that significantly, the bigger operators have had the confidence that, hang on, we can do this and it's not going to impact our business.
Yeah, they're looking at saving wages and electricity to start with.
The cost to a bowling centre, I haven't worked in a bowling centre for a long time and I don't know exactly what a mechanic would run. But I would say a 24-lane bowling centre could save £50,000 a year in salaries.
Alone, yeah.
£1,000 a week. It's a lot of money.
Are the string machines significantly cheaper than freefall then?
They are cheaper. Significantly?
Because they used to be quite expensive, the freefall.
I'm just trying to think of the difference.
On a pair of lanes used to be.
Percentage terms, I guess they're probably 70% of the cost of the freefall.
Right. So they're still quite expensive then, considering there's not as much on them as the old machine.
I can't justify that. They're probably about 60-70% of the cost. The big saving on strings is when they're installed. The cost of running them, the ease of maintenance, and the fact that there aren't a lot of spare parts to buy.
How much development went into that string machine then? Because the company bought Mendes a lot of years ago, and they had string machines and the magnetic machine. Is that where your technology came from? And then you
in fact, we've been using the technology that we're using with full size game from the mini bowling.
Yeah,
it's exactly the same. There's no difference.
Yeah, and then you just made it bigger for the full bowling when you knew it worked.
Yeah, but the technology is exactly the same. There's no difference. The impact on the playing game is different because on the mini bowling game, the weight of the string compared with the weight of the pin is not a lot of difference. Mm-hmm. But there's a huge difference between the weight of the string and the weight of the pin on full size.
Yeah.
And that's why, as I say, normal pinfall is not greatly affected.
Another one from Rob. I'm not sure you'll be able to answer this one, but how many different models of string machine pin spotters that conform to sanctioned standards, i.e. dimensions and specifications that match freefall, have a chance to be sanctioned? Are yours and the opposition ones all kind of much the same in the technologies that go into them?
I would think...
Would sanctioning AMF machines be different to sanctioning Brunswick, for instance? Are those...
You promise not to mention dirty words.
I know, but I'm the media, I'm allowed.
There are a lot of them around. And I can't imagine that the major manufacturers, certainly those that sell globally, would not be producing something that would conform. Now, does it conform exactly with a freefall? Obviously not, because because the pins are attached to the machine. But in terms of putting it down on the correct spots and where the correct spacing between pins, I have absolutely no doubts that the major manufacturers all would conform. So
when you've built them and on the opposition and stuff, you've gone to what existing rules were there anyway when you've designed these things. So you've designed them to go on spot, and you've designed them to be the same sizes and the kickbacks to be roughly the same and all the rest of it.
There's very little difference.
So there shouldn't be much difference between different companies' string machines.
No. As I say, there are a lot of... As I said, there's probably about 10 people manufacturing string machines, and some of those manufacturers were selling string machines long before that the majors got into it.
Yeah, Bolingo years ago.
Yeah, exactly. It's always been around, and because they never aimed selling those machines to a company that wanted sport bowling, they may not have been so.
We could have seen this a lot sooner had they marketed better 20 years ago.
Maybe.
We only ever saw them at the seaside, and it was kind of fun bowling and comedy bowling, basically.
Bowling is fun, Dom.
Well,
Bowling
yeah, it
is
is.
fun.
It's not fun when you get it serious though. When you get a 220 average and you're needing to earn $6,000 to keep your kids in shoes.
I told you I was in Amsterdam last week at a major amusement exhibition, one of the biggest in Europe, and I didn't realise that a bowling centre I used to bowl in 40 odd years ago, Canine, was in fact just across the street. And in fact, I won a tournament there about 42 years ago.
Oh.
And I went in there just to relive my experiences, and there was pictures on the wall. Not as big a collection as the one that you have here, but nevertheless, there's pictures of the past. And I was talking to the guy that actually handles that account when I got back to the exhibition, and I said, it's a great tournament centre. We used to come here every year. And he said, it's different now. He said they have a huge schools program, so they teach kids how to play, and it's very, very big. He said, but the competitive stuff they had at the weekend, they don't do any of it at all. And he said, but they are hugely successful, and they're always in the newspaper with their sort of nights at the weekend. He said, where you see people on the lanes swilling beer and smoking cigarettes, despite the fact you're not allowed to smoke indoors. No, actually, I think you're allowed to smoke pot indoors, but you're not allowed to smoke tobacco indoors in Holland. But and the owner is the same today as the owner that opened that centre 45 years ago. And it's just that times have changed, and that owner has either had to accept that his business, his competitive business, was going to continue to decline, and maybe decline to the point where he was no longer in business, or go with what was going to be successful today.
Yeah.
And it's not that they've divorced themselves from sport bowling. As I said, their schools programs are huge. But the tournament of the weekend is just gone because it just doesn't work anymore.
I'll bring another question in then from Andy James, who runs your scoring at the QubicaAMF qualifier in England each year. Do you see any hurdles with getting World Bowling, World Zones and federations on board with String? Is that holding some of the traditionalists back?
I think the apparent lack of decision is not helping. I think they should make some sort of
So we
statement.
need some kind of statement. We accept them and we're going to look into...
I think that's an important thing. I think they need to do that. If I hadn't taken that sort of enforced break away from the sport when I wasn't looking at it very closely, maybe the views that I have now wouldn't be the views I have now. It's just that it gave me an opportunity to look at it again. It was like coming back and, I had the background to understand what they were doing, but as a spectator, that just wasn't enjoyable for me. Mm-hmm. And I love what I do. I've spent over 50 years in this business. It's my life, and I love it. But I'm looking at this and thinking, well, if I was starting now, would I last 50 years in this? And the answer is probably I wouldn't last 50 weeks because it's not fun. And that's probably why I have these views. In answer to Andy, I think World Bowling needs to make a statement, but I think more importantly, and I hope today is one of the things that gets it going, let's sit down and discuss it. Let's work out what we can do in the future, and if that is nothing, then that's the answer. Because I don't have the answers. But together, maybe we can come up with some answers that make us more attractive than we are at the moment.
Well, in the past, the big chains, particularly QubicaAMF, they brought the sport to this country, in particular in 1960.
Well, I think, we did, because that was the format that was used in the US. Both ourselves and the major competitor, AMF in those days, prior to the Cubica and AMF merger, we brought it in the same format as it was in the United States. Now, at that time, I would say the US bowling centres typically had 80 or 90% of their business in leagues or tournaments. It was never like that in the UK. You know, I've worked in those bowling centres in the 1960s, and a good centre, and when I say good, one that had a large league programme, was maybe 35% maximum of the business. It was never more than that. Unfortunately, now I would be surprised if it's 10%. I'd be surprised.
So over time.
But I tell you what, one of the nice things, and I won't mention the chain operator, but other than to say they're successful, a UK successful chain operator that's shown consistent growth even through the bad times back in 2012, 13, 14, and so on. Consistent growth, continue to expand, continue to spend money on their existing bowling centres, have recognised, as successful as they are, it's still difficult to fill up Mondays and Tuesday nights.
Mm-hmm.
And they are now looking at, in fact, I did something a few weeks ago. You were there. No, you weren't. You weren't there. I was in Leeds, just down the road from here. And this chain operation asked me if I would go and speak to some of their managers, because they had never experienced the league. So I went there. In fact, the chairman of the BCBA was with me. I knew there was someone that was an outsider. And we went there. Andy Penny was there as well. And we went there to talk about leagues, because they said the only way we can continue to grow at the rate that we've been growing in the past is to fill those spots up of the week that are dead. So sport bowling is not dead from the proprietor's point of view. It may have taken a little time to recognise that there is some benefit to it. But, you know, Mondays and Tuesday nights are not the time people go out. So why not have a league? You know, the last time I looked at league bowlers' money looked exactly the same as the money that I spend. Why wouldn't you want to take it?
There's one of the problems over the years then, Roger, being the fact that sport bowling's been too big for its boots. You've got the proprietors. They've opened these centres.
I don't think it's become too big for its boots. I think it's become a little. They've
demanded a little bit too much over the time. I mean, I've looked at some of the history, and the BTBA and the TBPA were always fighting over something. The proprietors and the association were always fighting.
Dom, I've never understood the sense of that. I've never understood the sense. Because if you have sensible people on both sides, and I say both sides because I think they walk down parallel paths. They walk on the same street, one's on one pavement and one's on the other side, and they walk down the same path because their objectives, maybe not by definition, but what they're after is the same.
Mm-hmm.
These guys in the sport federation want more members. These guys that are running a business want more customers. I don't see why they shouldn't be holding hands from time to time. There's always going to be matters of principle.
I think where the
but
problem,
their basic objectives are the same.
I think the problem's been that the sports side's always demanded a little bit too much more than they should have been demanding. I mean, we rent.
Okay, let me address this.
We rent these machines. We go and we play on them, but they're not ours.
I know. But does the sport bowler really ask for more than the average bowler?
Some can be quite demanding. I mean, they want standards, but then.
Okay, so
even when the standards are perfect, they're moaning about the standards.
Let's step back. I'm now the proprietor, and I have a leisure customer here and a sports customer here. I would honestly provide them with exactly the same,
mm-hmm.
because I have as much commitment to this leisure player over here to keep the lanes clean, evenly dressed, and the machines going up and down as I do to the guy over here.
Mm-hmm.
What do I need to do differently? If you're running a bowling centre properly, I firmly believe...
Up until that point, everything is the same. It's when you start putting in lane patterns and things, that's when it changes the dynamic.
But where I've seen that in the UK and a number of other places where, you know, league bowlers come in for practice and, you know, can you dress the lanes in this particular way? If they have the capability with their equipment to be able to do it,
mm-hmm.
yeah, sure we do it. And we charge you, and they're quite happy to pay. So, you know, it's just a commercial decision.
Okay, so it's doable.
But I've you know, one of the things I've never really understood is why there is this thing that the sport bowler needs to be treated any differently to anyone else. Sport bowler, as far as I'm concerned, if I'm the proprietors of customers.
They shouldn't be, but I think I know bowlers that I've been with have been very demanding and very rude to customers and very rude to staff and stuff. Don't you know who I am and that kind of thing, and they've overstepped the mark sometimes.
I think fortunately, that's not just exclusive to sport bowling. I'm sure.
No, it's probably the same in all sports.
I think one of the problems is we play our sport so close to the guys next door to us who aren't playing our sport.
But what I mean is, up until this year, and I moaned for the last couple of years going to the TBPA meetings, where are the BTBA? Where are they? And it's only over the last 2 years that they've started to come.
Well, you know my history better than a lot.
Well, yeah, you've been there. You've been on both sides of the fence.
Yeah, I have sat on both sides of the fence, and sometimes I think it's probably a disadvantage because I can see through the stories a little bit better than most. I was not a member of the BTBA for a long time. I was very closely involved in it at one time. I spent a lot of time out of the country. I think almost 15 years living abroad in the bowling business. When I had bumped into Dave Steiner in South Africa at the Commonwealth Games about 3 years ago, maybe now, and I listened to what David was talking about. I knew David from the old days, but I listened to what he was telling me and the people that were now involved and what they were trying to do with the BTBA. And I said to David, if that's where you're going, the only way I can show my support is to rejoin, which I did, and I've kept my membership current ever since. I don't bowl, but I have a gold card.
Yeah, what number's on that card, by the way?
2.
Number 2. So
yeah, for some reason or other, being a member of the Federation years ago, when my number was 2. Actually, I think in those days it was 2. Now it's 0000002. But it's
I don't know what we need
2.
the zeros for.
I don't know what it came in, but
so number 1 was obviously Morris then. Very possibly.
I would guess so. My guess, yeah. And I would, the way Morris worked, I'm sure he took that to his grave, so no one could have it.
Daniel Johnson with a question here. In your opinion, what do you see for the bowling industry over the next 20 years in terms of leagues, tournaments, and chains? And what progress in terms of a long goal do QubicaAMF have? So for the next 20 years.
20 years.
I know it's a long time. In the next 5 years, is it going to be a 50-50 traditional and string, basically?
I can say without a shadow of a doubt, in 20 years' time, I'm not going to be back here. I'm not going to be back here to be able to answer, or to see whether I was right or not. Bowling.
Could we see a day where it is more string than it is traditional?
I think you'd be at least 20 years out before that could happen. At least 20 years. In my lifetime, there will never be a time.
Is that purely because people like Hollywood and stuff have spent that much on capital equipment already that they're not just going to write off that capital equipment just to get more capital equipment?
No, I don't.
Is it because things are in situ, so why change it?
I'm not a proprietor. I think if I had freeform machines and I had technicians capable enough of maintaining them properly, I don't think I'd change just to save a bit of money. No, I can't. What do I think bowling would look like in 20 years' time? I think it depends entirely where you're looking at it from. I think if you're looking at it from a manufacturer's point of view and an operator's point of view, it'll be fine. We will still be putting new machines in 20 years' time. There will still be new bowling centres opening. I think the third element, the sport, depends on what they do.
Yeah.
And
whether they embrace string or not.
Well, not necessarily embrace strings alone, because I think strings is only one of the issues. We need a complete relook at the sport, especially at the point when it is open for public scrutiny. If you take events where World Cup is a very good example, where you're having 24 games qualifying and everything else, you can continue with that, because I don't have a TV camera taking every second of it. But it's when you get to that point when you're exposed to the general public, when you have that opportunity, that privilege, that's the part we need to rethink. And if we get that right, I don't see why the sport shouldn't grow again. Because we're at a pretty low level at the moment. Local membership here is probably about 6,000, 7,000, something like that. Where 25 years ago it was 25,000. Now that doesn't mean to say 25,000 people no longer want to bowl. It's that 25,000 people don't find it attractive enough in the environment and with the lifestyle.
Is there anything you'd like to say to bowlers out there about QubicaAMF as a company?
I didn't realise I'd get the opportunity to advertise.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what we're here for.
It's an interesting company, you know, because I started. My first job with AMF
changed a
was
lot
in
as well.
1969. I'd worked for Granada prior to that, but 1969 was the first time I worked in a bowling centre.
Yeah,
In a bowling centre for AMF.
for AMF Humber.
And that was at Havant, which is just outside of Portsmouth. The manager didn't like me, and I didn't like him, and I didn't last very long. I was still very much involved in sport. I stayed in the business, although stayed involved in the sport, I came into the business for a few years. And I really got back into it again about 1982. I'd been running snack bars in bowling centres, franchise from AMF. And we had a new managing director.
Frames, remember it?
Yeah. Well, Brian North became the managing director in 1982, I think it was. And he came to see me in Portsmouth and said, Roger, I've got some bad news for you, but it may be good. And I said, what is the bad news? So he said, I'm now becoming the managing director of the company. And he said, and we've got to change what we're doing. He said, and I'm not comfortable with the food outlets in bowling centres we having no control over. So he said, so I'm going to take them back. He said, but I like what you do, so the only thing I can promise you is that yours will be the last to be taken back. So I said, fait accompli, there's nothing I can do. He said, however, would you like to join the company? So I said, doing what? He said, well, could you look after food and beverage for us? I said, Brian, I know nothing about food or beverage. He said, but you know bowlers. And he said, every time we've had a catering person in the company, they know catering, but they don't know our customers. And as you're right, Frames, which was our fast food restaurant, came out of that. And it was an immediate success everywhere except Newcastle.
Why Newcastle?
I'll tell you why. And
It's just been said, by the way.
We didn't realise until the first one was in Crawley. That was only a partial modernisation, but we put frames in. The first time we closed the bowling centre for a period of time to redo it was Hemel Hempstead. And we were doing something around 10% of our revenue in food and beverage. And after we did Hemel Hempstead, our revenue from food and beverage was over 30% of the total revenue, of a bigger revenue because the lineage went up too. So we realised, that food and beverage was important in its right form. And I stayed with that modernisation probably, in fact, it would have been until the end of 1985. So we'd maybe done 4 or 5 or 6. But one thing's for sure, what AMF did with those bowling centres during that 82 to 86 year period actually launched my next career, no doubt about it, because it fueled the growth in bowling centres. And I moved from selling bowling games to bowling products in January of 1986, when there were 51 centres in the country, 17, 18 of them owned by AMF. And by the time we got to the year 1990, there were 200 bowling centres. And I was in charge of that, the organisation that did that. I think it was 88 or 89, there was 1,300 lanes installed just by AMF. I don't know what the other guys did, but that's what they did.
Yeah.
Because I remember we had a financial controller, Andy Harris. He came up to my office. It was in the days of cheques, when you still wrote cheques. And he said, "I think you'd like to sign this cheque." And I said, "Why?" Because we needed 2 signatures on cheques, and normally anyone would sign them. And he said, so he put it on my desk, and he said, "Do you want to sign that one?" I said, "Yes," because it was for over £1 million in tax.
Wow.
To the net revenue here. So the business, but that growth was fueled, no doubt about it, by the modernisation that AMF did.
Yeah. I remember when they did it at Leeds, it was a big modernisation.
Yeah, but
The bright colours all came in.
AMF in those days was a really, it was a family, and I think the Cubica was like a family as well. They started somewhat later than we did, because it was in the early 90s when Cubica first came along. And the companies were very, very much family. And then towards the latter part of AMF, when it was in the hands of capital venture funds, it was never ever so much fun. The innovation was taken out of it because the investors into the company really had quite a short-term view of things.
Yeah, it would
just put our money here for 3 or 4 years and then get it out again.
Yeah.
So some of that atmosphere was lost, unfortunately, and I think to some degree it was lost with Cubica, because in the early days, Cubica relied upon other investors other than the 4 or 5 guys that started it. And I think the merger wasn't always an easy thing. When AMF and Cubica merged back in 2005, I think the European part of that went quite well. We Brits got on quite well, those Italian people,
Yeah.
even though they spoke a funny language. But it didn't work so well across the Atlantic. But I think all that changed when the legacy partners in Cubica acquired the whole company, and then because now we have no debt, we don't owe banks any money, we're not beholden to a capital venture fund that can pull the plug at any time. And I think prior to us doing hyperbowling, I think from 2013 up until the end of 2017, we'd reinvested about $30 million on our products. And it's lovely to work for that. And it's brought everyone together again, and it's like the family again, because
Back like
we're going somewhere.
Yeah, when you're aiming towards something.
And we influence things. If I want to speak to the CEO of the company, I've only got to pick up my mobile, and there's a good chance he's going to answer.
Yeah.
And he works in an office just like I do. He goes to work every day. And the 3 biggest investors in the company are working in our offices in Bologna. And
They're pretty hands-on then, the bosses.
Oh, they're terrific. They are, Could I have imagined it before they had control of the company? The honest truth is no.
It could have been difficult, yeah. It could have been.
There's a problem. But they have done incredibly well. And my hat's off to them. And I think if we will continue with innovation, there's absolutely no doubt about it. If proprietors around the world use it and work with it, their business will be well. Bowling's safe in 20 years' time. I can promise you, bowling is safe in 20 years' time.
That's probably a good
Let's
time to
have a look to see if we can do at least something for the sport.
It's probably about the right time to kind of conclude then. So you're still excited about coming to work? I mean, you're past retirement age now. You don't need to do this.
I passed retirement age 10 years ago.
Yeah, you don't need to do this,
And
but you still come to work, and you still go off to Romania in a couple of days, and then China in a few more. And
I was my last week Amsterdam, the week before I was in Dubai. Yeah, you're right. 2 days time I go to Romania for a couple of days. I come home. I leave for Kuwait and Dubai again on Sunday, and then I think I have a rest until. I think, I've got a little bit of rest before I have to go to the US again in November, and then for the World Championships, Hong Kong.
What's the secret to jet lag for someone that's travelled so much and across?
Do you know, I think old age helps.
You sleep a little bit more.
I don't sleep long anyway. The only time I've had a problem with it, and because I do a lot of long haul flights, I had a meeting. I seem to remember it was in Kuwait, and I took an overnight flight down, had the meeting during the day, and took the overnight flight back.
Wow!
And although I do both of those in business class, because of the tight, that killed me. That completely wiped me out. And last summer I had a problem because I did Bowl Expo in June. I came back for a day with the 8 hours time difference, and then flew to China, 7 hours time difference the next day.
Wow.
That was a bit of a problem. But that was a holiday, so I had time to recover.
Well, one more question then before we leave. It's from Bob Stocks. I don't know if you remember the name, but it
I
says,
don't remember, Bob.
do you miss the Richmond Grill days, Roger? Those were good times.
The restaurant or the team?
both, I get. It probably means the.
The restaurant's no longer there. And although I think that the team is certainly.
Who else bowled for Richmond Grill? There was quite a few decent players there.
There's some good players. Mo Knapp, who's no longer with us. Clive Thomas, who's no longer with us. Dave Sackers, who's now a Mormon, so I guess that's taken him out of the equation. Murray Phillott, of course,
Yeah,
still
Murray.
there. I think Murray
Portsmouth.
probably. I don't know if they still play under the same head,
He's
but they're
still
certainly
around.
still playing.
He's still playing, yeah.
Paul Lamont. I don't know if Paul actually played for the Richmond Grill, but I know he plays with Trevor Birch. There were a lot of them. In fact, it was sort of an amalgamation of two teams, part of it from Portsmouth and part of it from Southampton. It's one of the few times the two cities have got on well with each other. Was the Richmond Grill.
And for people that say bowling will never be the same as the old days, is that kind of true in some aspects? Have we lost that team play? Are we ever going to get it back? From what you went through in the 60s before that, it was different days, it was busier, it was...
Oh, they were. I remember when I was working in bowling centres in those days. I remember the weekends I could getting onto a plane or a ferry every weekend and going to the continent. I remember as if it were yesterday, and it hasn't been for some years now, the five-man team event in Paris in the Bois de Boulogne.
Paris Fives was a famous event,
just the most incredible event you could possibly wish to be involved in. And they had tiered seating behind that, not as big as the one we had in Shanghai, but nevertheless there was hundreds of people.
Is that a problem with the sport then at the moment, that we've got too much focus on singles and not enough on team play again? Because all the five-man leagues have gone, all the
you're right.
Fives tournaments, fours tournaments, cup fives, that kind of thing.
It would be. It's difficult enough to make singles a spectator event. It's almost impossible to make a five-man team event.
I don't think you need to with that though, because
But you don't need it on television.
No,
because
no,
the thing
because
that made the team event fun was the other four guys in the team.
Yeah, and the team.
And the other five that you would try to beat the hell out of.
Yeah. And the weekend away with friends and.
Yeah, and exactly. Invariably you travel with your wives or girlfriends or whatever. So there's always a big group of yous. And the trouble is that when a bowler is going to participate in an event for individuals, he turns up with his fleets of bowling balls. And that's it.
Mm.
But when the team went, they probably had another 5 or 6 or 7 people that went with them. So they created that atmosphere just for the fact there was a team. And I think for those young sports bowlers that are around now that have only experienced competing one-on-one, they've missed something. Because they were the most amazing days.
Well, they could be lacking at international level when they've not had that experience of playing with a team for a long period of time.
Well,
we all grew up on it.
In those days, we could typically play a five-man team game in 50 minutes.
Yeah.
At the speed that they play today, it would probably take them an hour and a quarter. So I can't imagine too many bowling centres even wanting that.
You can't get that. You need to make triple tier ball returns now anyway for the amount of balls, don't you? The old days where you're just there with your Black Knight and you're over there, and now it's 6-7 balls and hang on a minute, I'll just go get one out of the car. Or
I remember going to a bowling centre to play, and I was, as you know, back in the 70s, I played at international level, but I only had one ball. I had my first 300 games with. First one was with the rubber ball. Dick Webber.
Wow.
That was the first 300, and I think the others were with polyesters. But when I lived in Poland for all those years, I had probably more 279s, 289s, 290 games than I had in my entire career, because the technology of the bowling ball had changed.
What was the best ball you ever owned? Or you loved more than anything? Or the one that won you the most?
Well, I think the ones that won us the most was before the current technology came along, because of the time.
Your black angles,
the angle would have been, the angle, because what was the first one? The Excalibur was the first reactive.
Yeah.
Which came around 94 or 5.
Yeah, about 90.
Between I remember they used to be
92, 93, 94-ish. Yeah.
But the angle was. The angle was a really good ball. And then we had a yellow one. Do you remember the yellow angle?
The yellow angle, gold angle.
Which flared.
Called it, yeah.
And no one quite figured out why it flared, but it did. And I think Mats Carlson won a tour stop with it.
Popular ball.
Yeah.
The grey one not so much, because for the dry lanes, so you didn't see them as much. But the black and the gold.
Yeah.
And then the fact that
But when it,
AMF used-
I remember when it flared, and they said, "What is that doing?" Because no one had ever seen a ball that flared before. Because now they design them to do that, but we
Could
did it
you-
by accident.
one last question then, because I've been doing this for the last 10 minutes. Could you see a day when QubicaAMF start making bowling balls again? Even if it was just a few?
Clarification to that: AMF didn't make the angle. Columbia made the angle. for
Ah,
AMF.
right.
AMF hadn't made bowling balls for donkey's years.
I've never heard that. Is that a
The
well-known fact?
the AMF balls were either made in those days, but Columbia made the angle, and I think we had some sort of contract with Columbia that they weren't allowed to use a urethane on one of their own balls for a year.
Right.
That's why we had for a year, no competition. I think we might have used ebonite at one time.
So there is
But
scope
it's
to...
many years since we actually made a ball. Mo Pennell developed, what was it before he did for us?
Ninja.
The white one,
Oh, the white, or the XS.
the XS.
Oh,
Mo Pennell didn't design that, and I won't credit Mo with the colour because he was very much against it.
it's popular
That was a-
colour at the
It was
moment.
the president of the company at the time insisted upon it. But I remember when I first saw that. I think when they introduced it, there was a tournament or something at Nottingham.
About 87-ish or
It
something
was
like that.
just awful, ball. It was just horrible. As soon as I threw it down the lane twice, it was black. It's awful. Yeah.
But it's an excuse to sell more ball cleaner now.
So, would we get back to manufacturing bowling balls again? The answer, I think, would be no.
Probably not. Yeah.
Although, we licensed the AMF name.
The balls are actually still made by a company, aren't they?
So, could we at some point in the future see a QubicaAMF ball? Possible if they license the QubicaAMF name. So, but I don't see us ever getting back into that business.
Or if you go for LED balls or anything like that. Or
I think at the moment, the bowling ball market, even though the sport has been in decline, I think the should we say the top of the range bowling balls these days, I think that it's better service than it's ever been. I pick up Bowler's Journal and look through the number of ads for bowling ball companies. There's loads of them. Certainly more than when we did the angle all those years ago.
There is more companies and more balls. I mean, they're releasing
Storm didn't exist in those days.
8 or 10 balls a year, where you guys used to 3 a
Ebonite
year.
was there, but it was only one brand. Maybe it was an ebonite brand as opposed to how many tracks there's now, is it?
Yeah.
Because of the consolidation. But it's only consolidation of a
Track
lot of little
Ebonite,
companies that
Columbia,
have appeared since then. So who knows? I wouldn't be against it. And I can see some of the advantages. One of the things that concerns me with the fact, or one of the things about us not having a ball with a QubicaAMF name on it, is that when I go to Hong Kong in November, December this year for the World Championships, as the centre that event is being held in doesn't have QubicaAMF equipment in it, the only presence of QubicaAMF will be me. Because when I look around on the ball racks, it's going to be Storm and Ebonite and a whole bunch of others. So I think for sport bowling, it would, I don't want sport bowling to think that QubicaAMF is not interested in sport. As I've said, I spend a lot of time on this issue that the company pays me to. When I fly to Hong Kong and come back, you know how expensive airfare is. The company pay me to do that because we are interested in sport, and I can't sell a bowling ball to help recover that cost. We're interested, and if I think the contribution that we're trying to make at this moment in time, and maybe me leading that effort, is to get people to talk. And if we can open up a dialogue, anyone can organise it, but it needs to be done. As I say, it's almost, Dom, if I've had 50-something years of really wonderful experiences, both in this connected with the sport and in the industry. The way I'm looking at things at the moment, and retirement is looming me in the face whether I like it or not, I'd hate to think that when I do retire, I'm not able to look forward or look back on my retirement and say it's just got worse. You know, I would love people to get the opportunity to have as much fun in this as I've had. So all the time I'm able to do that, and you know, I should carry on.
Oh, well, thanks for 50 years anyway, Roger. It's nice for having people sticking around that long, because, you know, I've been in the game a fair while and I've seen people drop in and out and, you know, be a bit flaky with it, but you've been there, you know, since not far off the start of it, and you're still kicking away now and still looking at the future, which is good.
I've been one of the more fortunate because, you know, I worked in bowling centre operations for 20 odd years. You know, I've run bowling federations. I was the general secretary of the WTBA for a short period of time before the industry attracted me back. I've been a player at the top level as it was in those days, and I can't say. I think the business is the thing that's really kept me interested in the way it's developed. You know, that's been a lot of fun, and in recent years, at a time when, you know, I should be winding down because of the Italian ownership, you know, you get even more enthusiastic about it, which is
because there's more things coming all the time.
It is. You think, God, you know, what next?
Yeah. Well, what next indeed?
What next? Sport bowling.
We'll end right there then, Roger.
Thanks
for everybody watching for the last hour and a half. It's a lot longer than we thought we were going to go for. We will talk to Roger again in the future, I'm sure, and hopefully we're going to get some kind of discussion going between World Bowling, USBC, QubicaAMF, all the other chains and companies to try and find out what we're going to do about string bowling in the future. So thanks again for coming with us, Roger. And
You're welcome, my pleasure.
A safe journey to Romania next week.
Thank you very much.